I am Janet M. Smith. Our speaker this morning is Janet E. Smith, recently retired from the Sacred Heart Major Seminary in Detroit, Michigan. She's the author of Humanae Vitae, A Generation Later, and A Right to Privacy. Self-Gift is a volume of her already published essays on Humanae Vitae and the thought of John Paul II. She edited Why Humanae Vitae is Right, A Reader, Life Issues, Medical Choices, Living the Truth in Love, a Pastoral Approach to Same-Sex Attractions with Father Paul Chek, and Why Humanae Vitae is Still Right. Professor Smith has served 3 terms as consultor to the Pontifical Council for the Family, and also served as a member of the Anglican Roman Catholic International Commission for 8 years. She has a regular column in the National Catholic Register. She's received 3 honorary doctorates and several other awards for scholarship and service. She's appeared on Fox Morning News, CNN International, CNN Newsroom, Al Jazeera, and has done many shows for various series on EWTN. More than 2 million copies of her talk, Conception, Why Not?, have been distributed. It's our great privilege and honor to have her here with us this morning. Would you please help me welcome Dr. Janet E. Smith.
I do hope Janet Smith pays her bills because I have when I was at the University of Toronto, where I studied for 5 years, there was another Janet Smith who did not pay her library fines, and it was some difficulty for me to get in and out of the, you're okay, all right, you're okay. It is wonderful to be here. As I mentioned, I spent 5 years at the University of Toronto, and I believe I served on the board of the Alliance for Life. Remember, but I think I did. And I was a speaker for Toronto Right to Life, and there was a 1 year of my life where it seemed like I spoke every week in some high school or college in Toronto. It was really a wonderful time of my life. I had a terrific 5 years in Canada. It was in a sense, launched me on what I'm doing now. I met a group of terrific, enthusiastic, zealous graduate students, all who were Catholic. We were reverts or converts, and some of us were cradle Catholics, but it was I think it was 76 to 81, something like that, or 75, who knows, somewhere around that time. And the big debate then was on, certainly no one thought contraception, the church was right about contraception, and the big debate at that time was women priests. And my friends and I, we had an amazing number of groups. I ran the pro-life group. There was a Thomas Aquinas reading group. There was a Vatican II documents reading group. There was a Bible reading group, and actually there was a Humanae Vitae reading group, because we felt that if we were going to be faithful Catholics and we were intellectuals, that it was our job to know how to defend these documents. We were all in with this. We ran demonstrations and all sorts of things. So it was really quite marvelous. I actually feel it was kind of a novitiate in my life where I was given training in how to be a Catholic and a Catholic academic, if you will. So it sort of started here. I read Humanae Vitae, and I thought it was just beautiful and marvelous. And in a certain sense, it hadn't brought together really the connection between contraception and abortion until I got a job at Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana. And there I started had done some here, but much more in South Bend, did sidewalk counseling. And I would see these young women coming to the abortion clinic, and always thinking, what? Why are all these girls getting an abortion? You know, what's going on here? I said, well, they're in a relationship where having a baby is just an enormous inconvenience, and they're And I said, well, what's that all about? And I said, well, they are using contraception. And by using contraception, they think that they are safe from a pregnancy. So at that time, I had this kind of epiphany that here I was at the abortion clinic, and I suspect many of you have done counseling or praying outside of abortion clinics. Everybody should, because it's such a stark moment where someone comes in carrying new life and then goes out and a baby's dead in the meantime. So it brings everything kind of, it really, you think about things in a very powerful way. And again, I had this epiphany that contraception was a very direct link towards abortion. So I more or less decided to devote myself to, well, I thought here it was like, here were the babies that were drowning and we were trying to get them out of the river. But I felt there was someone upstream who was throwing the babies in. And then I was going to go upstream and see what that was, and it seemed to me it was contraception. So my contribution to the pro-life movement, I decided, would be trying to convince people why contraception is wrong, and hoping this would lead them to not have sex irresponsibly, which is any time outside of marriage, and would then reduce abortion. I don't know how many abortions I've stopped, but I certainly have. People come up to me and they say, you're responsible for this, meaning like 6 kids, you know. My query is always, why are none of them named Janet? So there's still time, not for many people in this room, but still time. All right. Okay, we need to get this up for a slideshow. All right. I don't see what's coming next, which might be dangerous. Is there a way we can set this up? It's not the usual computer that I use. Let's see if we can. Do you know how to do that, sir? You don't. All right, well, that's interesting. I might. Let me just check another one. All right, well, let's go for the drama. All right. My famous talk is contraception. Why not? This is a 3rd edition. It's titled Contraception, Cracking the Myths. It's available still at Lighthouse Talks. Some of you might even go back so far to know the little old cassette that I once did. I've been around a long time. And one thing I regret over the years is that I haven't kept a journal of the remarkable conversations I've had and things that have happened. And one of my favorite ones is a friend of mine once was driving by a brothel, and he noticed the front door was open, cracked open. So he went and put the cassette tape in the doorway. And then he said he drove back the next year and it was burnt to the ground. So it's a powerful tape, powerful tape. Okay. It always has automatic timing here, all right? All right, it's gonna be exciting. It's always exciting that, see, not only do you not know what's next, but I don't know what's next, okay? I've given these talks so many times, thousands, and I never just give them again. I rework them. And yesterday, I was just going to, spend an hour maybe on each talk, and I ended up spending like 6 hours, and I don't know how that happens. But sometimes, if you want to look for the precise something online, that you have a better image than you've had before, you want an updated article or updated chart, it can just take forever to find these things. And I lost all sense of time. I was just working, always I would look, oh my gosh. Anyway. Contraception, why not? A couple years ago, I gave this talk. Many years ago, I gave this talk in California to one of my godsons. I was visiting a godson who was 8 at the time. And he told me that when he misses me, he watches my video. He said, you know that video of yours, contractions, why not? All right. Now, he's the oldest of 5, and he knows what contractions 5 minutes apart and 3 minutes apart mean. And then a couple years later, I was giving a talk in Trinidad, and I was asked at the end of my talk, I was asked a question whether or not rapists should be castrated. And my knees kind of buckled, and I said, I really don't know. I really don't know the answer to that question. Obviously, rape is a terrible crime. A severe penalty is warranted. I've heard there's drugs that can be used to control the sexual desire. Maybe we should explore that. And then I'm leaving Trinidad the next day, and I see the national newspaper of, here we go, National Newspaper of Trinidad with this headline, Castrate Rapists. And I look at it and it says, drugs can be used to reduce their sex drive, U.S. professor. Now my knees really buckled, and I thought, I wonder if there's any other U.S. professors in Trinidad this weekend. So I want you to know you can look forward to my 3-part series of talks. Contraception, why not? Contractions, why not? Castration, why not? All right, today I'm talking about the sexual mess we are in and how we got here. This is the sexual mess. Most of you know this as well as I do. You have 1 out of 5. It vacillates. It is going down. It's probably closer to 1 out of 5, but 1 out of 4 pregnancies ends in abortion. 48% of marriages undertaken today will end in divorce in 20 years. 42% of babies are born out of wedlock. 1 out of 5 Americans has an incurable sexually transmitted disease. The single largest group living in poverty in the United States are single mothers with children, and the father of those children are cut adrift. We should never forget the fathers, right? They're not staying at home with the kids, and they don't mature. The surest way to maturity in this world is to raise children, and they're not a part of that. There's the use of porn and the damage that does to marriages. There's same-sex marriages have become legal, and transgenderism has affected nearly everything, especially women's sports. Right? All of this is our sexual mess. There's undoubtedly more that we can add to this, but this is a pretty good list of where we are. So, what am I looking at, and how did I get here? Right? Right? I don't see no miracle in how we got here. Here was where we was headed. Right? It was predictable, and in a certain way, Paul VI did predict it. He predicted a great deal of what happened in Humanae Vitae. He did not predict same-sex marriages, and no one predicted transgenderism. 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, most people had never heard of it. And now it's daily in the news. People are losing their jobs because they won't use the right pronouns. Doctors won't do certain operations. And it's become a kind of a tyranny of a worldview that you have to have. In London, a surgeon, was removed from his position because he wouldn't do a sex change operation. And they said that it was an offense against human dignity that he wouldn't do that. Okay, now this is 2010, one of the an anniversary of the pill, which was invented about 1960. And it says, so small, so powerful, and so misunderstood. And I know a lot of you know this, but it's good to review things and look at stats. But how much the world thinks the pill was one of the greatest inventions ever in the history of mankind, right? It's just one of the best things that's ever been invented. And we know, again, from what I just recited about the dangers, the bad consequences of contraception, that it's actually been one of the most harmful inventions in the history of mankind, right? It is true. It is so small. It is so powerful. And it is so misunderstood because it's considered still to be one of the solutions to so many of the world's problems, when really it is one of the greatest contributors to the world's problem. Okay, there are medical reasons for prescribing contraceptives. Some doctors prescribe it for PMS, acne, endometriosis, ovarian cysts, etc. Now, as most of you know, it doesn't cure anything. Contraception doesn't cure anything. It just reduces the symptoms of these conditions. And for many women, it reduces pain, which can be absolutely debilitating, right? They cannot operate basically within some of these conditions. And the church does allow for the use, and this is the way I want to say it, for the use of the hormones that are in the contraceptives. Women taking contraceptives for these reasons are not contracepting. They are taking the hormones in the contraceptive pill to treat medical conditions. Contraception means you're intending to engage in a sexual act and to render it infertile, right? To do something to render it infertile. Women taking the pill, and it's called a contraceptive, but really it's just a pill. It's a pill that has hormones in it. So the woman who's taking that pill other women use it for contraceptive purposes, but she's using it for the purposes of reducing PMS, etc. So the contraceptive effect, the effect of making her infertile, is a side effect of her act. It's a side effect of her act. It's not the direct, she might not be having sex at all. So how could you say she's contracepting? Contracepting has to take place in the context of a sexual act. You intend to engage in a sexual act and you want to render it infertile. These women are taking the pill that has the hormones in it that they need in order to deal with these conditions. So it's not that the church says it's moral sometimes to contracept. It's never moral to contracept, because contracept means intending to engage in a sexual act and wanting to render it infertile. And these women are not doing that. If they are doing that, then they're just taking advantage of a situation, and they're essentially guilty of contraception because of their intention. There are alternatives to the hormones in the pill for women who have those conditions. One is natural hormones. We're learning more and more about natural hormones and better nutrition. Hormones, like everything else in our body, is a result of the nutrition, what we're eating. And we need to produce hormones, but certain things help us produce the hormones that we need. Some women need surgery for endometriosis or ovarian cysts. Those are alternatives to the hormones, because as I said, there are alternatives to the hormones that are in the pill. Those hormones in the pill cure nothing, cure none of those situations. Again, they just make the difficulties that come with those conditions easier to deal with. The Pope Paul VI Institute in Omaha, Nebraska, Dr. Tom Hilgers is one of the very best for helping women diagnose what is the source of whatever conditions they have and helping her find natural solutions to those problems. There's this marvelous book by Marilyn Shannon, been out for some time, Fertility Cycles and Nutrition. I had an assistant once, a young woman, who had horrible bleeding for her period, terrible PMS, and a very irregular cycle. And she started watching her nutrition and took a vitamin called Optivite, which is a vitamin for women in reference really to their fertility cycle. Within 3 months of taking that, she had none of her symptoms. Her cycles were absolutely regular. Every 28 days, the excessive bleeding was gone, the pain was gone. It was kind of a miracle, but she was not getting the nutrition or the vitamins and the minerals she needed in order to produce the right hormones. Okay, there are social reasons for prescribing contraceptives, and those are the most common ones. One is fighting overpopulation. We'll talk about that in a minute, but it's been pushed all over the years for decades in third world countries to fight overpopulation. And I even went in to find some new charts and information on overpopulation. And I remembered when I started doing this back in the 90s, and oh my gosh, the world's population doubled between 1950 and, now I don't remember. It's something like 2000. Went from 2 billion to 6 billion. And they kept thinking that every 50 years the world's population was going to double again, and double and double and double. So that by, couple millennia from now, we'd have 350 billion people on the face of the earth, and people be falling off the globe. Well, the fact is, as most of you know, the world's population is declining as far as fertility rate is concerned. And as the fertility rate declines, the population is going to decline. Europe is not reproducing itself. As a matter of fact, that's why there's such a push for immigration, and allowing immigration in many countries, most likely here as well, because there's a declining native population, and you need people in order to have workers. So and you can't find those charts. Those charts that show a realistic decline in population don't show up. They're still showing to about 2,150 as far as the line goes, and that's still sort of going up till then. But they don't show that very soon it's going down at 2,150. It's already headed that way, but we still have a lot of people who are reproducing. As those people die off, there's going to be fewer people who reproduce, and it's down, down, down. Okay, we certainly thought that contraception would avoid or reduce unwanted and unwed pregnancies, again, a social reason, and that it would reduce the number of abortions, and it would improve marriages. Now, these are not stupid expectations as far as what would happen with the pill. Back in 1960, I think it was actually possible to think that the pill would do this. It was only the church that understood the really severe consequences that would come if contraception became widely used. And how did the church know? It's guided by the Holy Spirit. I mean, we're too stupid to figure these things out on our own. So the Holy Spirit guided us to see what was coming. And then, as is now, the church seems absolutely retrograde to the rest of the world and to many of those in the church. That when is it going to get on the right side of history? When is it going to come into the modern world? And the church in this instance, as in so many instances, is teaching the truth, and it's just hard for people to grasp it. Or if we don't grasp it with all of the gifts that we're given with the sacraments in the church, how can we possibly teach it to the rest of the culture? These are contraception's bad consequences. Many of them I've already mentioned. I will touch upon all of these at some point in my talk. One is it's bad for the health of women. That's mostly my next talk. It increases the incidence of sexually transmitted diseases. There is no contraception that protects against sexually transmitted diseases except possibly the condom. But even there's almost always leakage, and there's still the possibility of the transmission of a sexually transmitted disease. It's bad for male-female relationships. It facilitates sex outside of marriage. It leads to unwanted pregnancy and single parenthood rather than reducing it. It leads to single parenthood. And I want to stress again the fathers that are cut adrift. I've been working a bit with a single woman and single mother in the inner city of Detroit. She's 26 and has 5 children out of wedlock. There's only 2 fathers involved, which is its own kind of good thing, honestly. But you know, he's not taking care of those children, so he's cut adrift. All right, he will just be a boy until he decides to take on the responsibilities of fatherhood, in which he'll become a man. And so we have allowed all these men to just float away from their responsibilities. Right? It causes and leads to abortion. It contributes to divorce. It contributes to poverty and social chaos. It increases the use of porn. It's harmful to the environment. And it has eased acceptance of same-sex marriages and of transgenderism. I'm going to give you some sociological data for almost all of these in the course of this talk and the next talk. But that's a long list of bad consequences, a very long list. You know, if we were to get people to stop using contraception right now, there's a couple things that would happen. You'd hear the screeching of brakes because there's all these people are going off to do something they couldn't do if they didn't have access to contraception, right? And you would immediately start having people have to become more responsible about sex. And as people become more responsible about sex, that means they're going to get married, because marriage is the only place in which you are truly responsible about sex. And more marriages, stronger, better marriages, is really the core of everything. If you strengthen marriage and family, you have begun to create a solution to all the problems that any culture has. Bad for women's health, again, that's my next talk, all right? The most crucially bad thing that contraception does is that it changes our understanding of sex. It changes our understanding of the meaning and purpose of sex. You will hear young people say, talking about sexual intercourse, this person and that person, it's just sex. It's just sex. And I would say there's no such thing as just sex, right? Sex is huge. It's of huge importance. It's almost like the atomic bomb, or atomic energy. It can either be used for something really marvelous. Atomic energy can provide electricity, etc., for millions and zillions. It can also blow up the world, right? A little thing. It can go both ways, right? There's the sexuality, the modern view, and then the Christian view. This is actually quite antique. I'm sure if I had another hour, I'd found a better picture. And this is a view, again, that sex that involves two people having a nice evening together, having a drink, and then having sexual intercourse, and possibly not having any contact with each other after that. What this really should show is a dance or some sort of party. Now they don't have dances anymore. A drinking party on a college campus, and a male and a female who've never met each other get drunk, and they find a dark room with a flat surface and have sex, right? And have nothing, may not know each other's last name, and may not have anything to do with each other after that. And that's what college students call hooking up, and it's just sex. It's just no big deal. I talked to two college students recently, raised in a very devout Catholic household, troubled household. Again, the marriage ended in divorce, and it was traumatic in every way to the family. And both of these very lovely-looking young people were just so curious that their mother and I took sex so seriously. For them, it was just sex. You have dinner with a person, you play tennis with a person, which people don't. But let's say they did, and you have sex, and that's just what you do with each other. The Christian view of sex, and that's an old-fashioned picture too, but I like it because those are my parents and my brother and his wife, and I think 4 of their then children with a neighbor child thrown in, eventually 6. And that's the purpose of sex in the Christian view, is to create a loving family, right? A loving family. And that's what everything should be. All decisions made in respect to sexual intercourse should be, is it leading to a loving family? That where the love just keeps multiplying. I mean, those children are now getting married, and they're bringing families together, and that the clan keeps expanding. Right? It's a wonderful, beautiful thing. So again, this is the students used to think this was very funny, and it is very funny. Nice to meet you. We'd like to have dinner, go to a movie, and then have sex. Sure, why not? As I said, that's way too formal right now. This is way too formal. Nobody has this anymore. Again, it largely most young people are initiated into sex through a drunken moment, and even if that's not, they're initiated, especially when they go to college. It's very much, again, drinking, getting pretty much darn drunk, and having sex and just moving on with your life, of course, unless there's a pregnancy, which changes everything. So this is the percentage of students in age grade 9 through 12 who report they are sexually active. This is a kind of chart I'd like to scream about in a certain sense. I'm showing it to you, but this is people who've had sex in the last, high school students in the last 3 months. And it goes from 9th grade to 12th grade. And so I hope not too many 9th graders are having sex. Maybe not too many 10th graders. By the time they're seniors, a lot are. It is true that that is going down over the years. This starts in 1989. I don't know why they chose 1989 or 1991 to 2017. High schoolers are having less sex. We hope that's a good thing, and I think there probably are some good reasons. I do think that the chastity ed programs do have an effect. I do think that there are young people that understand that it's not a good idea if they want to go to college and get married and have children. We're making some impact. But then on the other hand, some of it is total lack of social skills. All right? They just play with their phones all the time and have very little interaction. And then, of course, it's a matter of a lot of porn. People use porn in Japan. Sex is kind of dying out because the men are just so attached to porn, and they don't need a real woman. And there's getting to more and more sex toys that men use, and they don't need to learn the relationship skills. Almost every male in here can probably remember how difficult it was at one time in your life to walk across the room to talk to her, right? Took every little bit of courage. You'd rather run into battle than do that for fear of rejection, fear of being mocked, not knowing what to say, not knowing how to approach her. And if people can hide from that and still get their sexual appetites met, they often will do that, right? Because it's so hard to establish relationships. There's a marvelous movie. If you have children, grandchildren, you're in charge of a youth group, you should have an evening to watch this with them. Bring your grandchildren over who are teenagers, and grandma will make them their favorite dessert and talk with them and then watch this movie. And it's a remarkable movie. It's about a philosophy professor at the Boston University who, in her ethics class, requires her students to go on a date. College students. Most of them have never been on a date. Never been on a date. And they've had a lot of sex, but they've never been on a date. Right? And they talk about it. They talk about hooking up, that they've done that, but they've never been on a date. And she has rules. One is that you can't invite this person by email or text. You either have to ask them face to face or by telephone. And it can only last an hour. And you can only spend $10. Right? It's an amazing thing. And these kids get so excited about this, that they have to do this. These boys are just so adorable. They do the whole thing of pressing their pants and getting the right shirt and making sure they just look just right. And there's a really cute moment where this kind of guy, you would say, he's just regular guy, not necessarily handsome or anything, but he says, oh, okay, I've got to do this, my assignment. He says, there's a girl in this other class, I've been noticing her like for 3 weeks or 3 months, I don't know, it was a period of time. I've been noticing her, she's the one I'm going to ask out. And so we see him a little bit later, and he just says, his face is just bursting with joy. And he said, I asked her, and she said yes. He said, this is just the yes is better than a hookup. And it's true, because he asked her and she said yes. She wasn't drunk, he wasn't drunk. They knew what they were doing. All right, the hookups, it's not an act of free will so much, because you reduced yourself to being without the capacity of making good choices. Another young man has picked out the young woman he wants to ask out. She works at the cafeteria, and he wants to, he knows when she gets off of work, so he goes there so he can meet her after work and ask her out. And he gets there, and the janitors are already closing the doors. And he says, please, 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 just wait another minute or two until she comes out. I don't know if she might have gone on a different way. And they said, why? And they said, well, I want to ask this girl out for a date. And he said, oh, good choice. Good choice. It was just, you could just see him being just so happy that he was making a good choice, and these other men thought so. But this is what we've deprived young people of. My father told me that when he was a young man, he lived in a small town, Ohio, and every weekend there was a dance at the high school in the gym every weekend. And he said you were expected to ask a girl out by Wednesday, right? So that on Thursday and Friday, you could practice your dance steps in the gym so that you could cut a good figure when you got on the floor on Saturday night. You had to go to the girl's house, you had to go up to the door and ring the bell and meet her father. Of course, hello, son. This is my daughter's son. Bring her back, son, at such and such a time, Young men, you remember, some of you, that fear of the father meeting the father. You know that he's going to cut you to pieces if you do any harm to his daughter. The message is there. I'm watching out for her. You be good to her. The next week, you couldn't ask out the same girl. That was considered too close to going steady, right? You weren't supposed to go steady. So you could ask out any other girl. You could ask her sister or her best friend, and you weren't considered to be. Now young people would say, he betrayed me, right? He asked out somebody else. Right now, an invitation to do anything is almost considered to be a marriage proposal, right? The minute you ask someone else for these young kids, it's like, now we're a thing. So that's why men don't ask girls out, because it's like she thinks we're already engaged or pre-engaged or something. And so it's since people don't ask, they just sort of drift together and, again, get drunk and have sex. All right, so obviously this can lead to unwanted pregnancy. This is one of the lines that young people like the best, that people now think you can get pregnant by accident, right? You have, because you're taking the contraceptive pill and you are protecting against getting pregnant. And if you should get pregnant, it's an accident and it's not something you prepared for because you didn't think it would happen. You've separated. Having sex and having babies are two entirely different activities in our culture. So when a pregnancy happens, it's sort of like, oh, what happened? How did this happen? Right? And I say, you can fall on a banana peel by accident. You can get in a car accident by accident, but you can't get pregnant by accident. We know the cause and we know the effect, right? And it actually means something's gone right when you get pregnant through an act of sexual intercourse, rather than that something's gone wrong. And when I gave this talk once in Florida, at a university there, a professor had his students who were journalist students, great guy, his journalist students come to my talk under the ruse that they were to find out what would be how they set up an article about my talk and what would be the lead sentence to draw people in. And that remark is that you can't get pregnant by accident, that something's gone right, not wrong, when you have an act of sexual intercourse and get pregnant, was the line that 90% of the students said should be the lead article. It was a new thought to them. Boom! And I say, you step on the gas pedal of a car and it goes forward. You don't say, oh, how did that happen? Again, you know the cause and you know the effect, right? But this is what our culture has done. It has separated having sex from having babies. At one time, having sex, having babies went together. And having sex and having babies meant that you should be married. And this was a package deal, right? You shouldn't have sex unless you're married because sex leads to babies, package deal. But contraception has separated those concepts, and it's now hard for people to get those back together again. Women of between 14 and 45 who have ever used contraception, 98% of women in the U.S. from ages of 15 to 44 have used some type of contraception. And apparently that number is no different for Catholics than for the rest of the population. 82% have used the pill, 92% have used the condom, 17% have used Depo-Provera, 21% use female sterilization. Something like 30% of women are actually sterilized by the time they get to be 30, and 40% by the time they get to be 40. Right? 13% use male sterilization, and only 2% have used NFP. Okay. Contraceptive failures. The condom fails 18% of the time. Just put that on your, as I say, under your hat and think about it. 18% of the time. We are actually airdropping contraceptives in third world countries, right? And how insane that is, because again, the temperature makes a huge difference. If latex and plastic expand and contract, it gets holes, and they're useless, right? So we're putting defective condoms all over the world. Birth control pills fail 9% of the time. Now they have a laboratory or clinical effectiveness rate or failure rate of under 1%. But in real life, it's much higher because women don't take it. You have to take it within a 3-hour window every day. If you forget and don't take it till later in the afternoon, your own hormones might kick into gears, okay? Your body wants to ovulate. And what you're doing is suppressing the natural hormones. And if you should forget to take it one day or take it later in the day or take a certain kind of medication that might interfere with it, it's no longer effective. This chart, again, I spent some time yesterday looking for new charts. They all didn't have what I have. They don't have Norplant on here. I don't think many people use that anymore, but there's a new one called Nexpronin, something like that. It's a one little stick that a woman gets inserted in her arm that can stay there for 3 to 5 years and be effective. She doesn't, as they say, contraception where you don't have to think. You don't have to take it every day. It's just right there in your arm. Now, of course, it can cause all sorts of problems. It could break and deliver many more hormones than it's supposed to at any time. It can actually get lost in your body, and you have to do you have to do surgery to get it out if you can find it. Right? It's relatively new, so the dangers of it are not yet fully understood. But it's just about 100% effective. All right, because you can't forget. All right, and it's there all the time. All right, percent of U.S. births outside of wedlock by major groups. Around in 1964, around 10%, a little bit 12% of babies were born out of wedlock. Wait a second, yeah, less than 10%, fewer than 10% of babies were born out of wedlock. By 2014, over 40% of babies are born out of wedlock, different for different ethnic groups and races. And when I say I've been teaching in Detroit, 80% of the babies are born out of wedlock, 80%. It has no tax base. There's no tax base in Detroit. It costs $7,000 to insure a car for a year in Detroit, $7,000. Because nobody has any money, so they can't pay for accidents, and so there's so many, and they all drive. The young woman I was helping, it's not unusual for them to, the single mother with 5 children, her and her friends, not unusual for them to own 4 cars in a year. Right? They buy them for $500, which means they're just about dead. And if they last a couple weeks, that's a good thing. At most, they usually last 3 to 4 months. The brakes go out, the transmission goes out, something goes out. They don't register it or pay for insurance because they don't have it. So any policeman can stop any woman who looks like a single woman and impound the car because she doesn't have a driver's license, she doesn't have registration, she has no insurance. Right? So she just kisses that car goodbye. It takes $600 to get it out of the pound. She can buy a new car for $600. So she gets her next $600 together and buys a new car. And it just repeats itself and repeats itself and repeats itself. So even those of us who would like to buy a car for these young women, which we've done, we can't afford the insurance either. So you don't buy a very expensive car because it's going to be gone before long. Anyway, the tragedy of this is enormous. The tragedy of this picture is enormous. That's incredible. Okay, more than 4 in 10 children are born to unwed mothers. More than 4 in 10 with the same chart in a certain sense. There's no greater predictor of a difficult life than being raised in a single-parent household. And then a single-parent household, you continue from that. There might be many kinds of dysfunction. This young woman that I'm dealing with, her mother was murdered in front of her when she was 8. Right, when she was 8. Her father died, her parents were divorced. Her father died a couple months later of a drug overdose. You want to say, what chance did that girl have in this world? She makes a lot of bad decisions. And who wouldn't? Who wouldn't? She gets 5 kids out of bed in the morning, gets them dressed, and gets them to school. Not regularly. And the school teaches them nothing. I've tried to help the oldest boy with 7 with some of his homework. He knew nothing. But how many of us, I know I couldn't get through one day of her life. All right? I would roll up into a little ball and get in the corner and cry because it was so overwhelming. How do you do this? She doesn't know how much money she's going to have, and can she afford this and afford that? And she does it, but the cost that must take on her system. is enormous. And what is the future of those 5 kids? What's their future? And they're the result of our culture. They're the result of our culture, right? It leads to abortion. 54% of women who have abortions had used a contraceptive method, usually the condom or the pill, during the month they became pregnant. Among those women, 76% of pill users and 49% of condom users report having used their method inconsistently, while 13% of pill users and 14% of condom users report correct use. 54, so you say, okay, more contraceptives, fewer abortions. Or you say 54% of the women having abortions have used it in the month that they became pregnant. They're contraceptively experienced. Almost every woman that has an abortion has used contraceptive. They know what it is. They've used it. For some reason, they might have stopped during that month. They broke up with the boyfriend for a while, and now he comes back and they resume their ways, but they haven't resumed the contraception. All right? Again, 46% did not use contraception, 28% a condom, 14% the pill, and 12% other. Abortion rate by relationship. Cohabiting, 59%, 60%. Formerly married and not cohabiting, 31%. Never married and not cohabiting. It's kind of interesting that there's many more abortions among the cohabiting than the never married and not cohabiting. Twice as much. Curious to me. But when people say, cohabitation, I've, of course, talked to my dear ones in my life who think that cohabiting is a very sensible way to prepare for marriage. And I've been trying to talk to one man who I just am extremely fond of. And he's been having sex with his girlfriend as he did with his previous one. He's not promiscuous. And I keep asking, what happens if she gets pregnant? And his response is, that won't happen. It's not going to happen, is what he says. And we've had this conversation 3 times. So one time we were at a family event. We were sitting off in a corner with each other. And his mother is furious with me, my sister, that I have these talks. I would think she'd be baking me a cake. But he's not furious. He knows I love him. And he knows that I'm trying to, he doesn't run away from it. We had the 3rd one recently. And I said, I was traveling, I just was able to have lunch. I said, can you stay a little bit longer and we can have a talk? And he said, yes. And he says, you know what we're talking about? He said, yeah, it's the Aunt Janet talk. I said, yes, it's the Aunt Janet talk. And anyway, he said, it's not going to happen. I said, in this room, there's a whole lot of it. It's not going to happen. So I'm not going to tell you who they are. But it does happen. I said, you use contraception, you have sex, you still get pregnant. I said, is it loving to her to do this? If you're not intending to marry her, are you? He says, well, I love her, but we're awfully young and it's not the right time and this. I said, well, so what's happened? Does that mean that she's going to be a single mother? Do you want a woman you love to be a single mother? Do you want to only periodically see your child? I said, do you want her to put the child up for adoption and never see your child? Do you want her to have an abortion? I said, what are you doing to this woman you say you love? Why are you putting her at risk? You can tell he hasn't, their conversation just went to who's going to use the contraceptive and what's it going to be. That's their conversation. Their conversation has not been what happens if there's a pregnancy here. And I went way back, late 1960s. I was in college, and one of my friends was having sex with one of the most attractive men on campus. I was a little bit jealous, and I asked, but what are you going to do if you get pregnant? I've always been a hard-headed, kind of practical person. So what happens if you get pregnant? She says, I don't know him well enough to ask. Okay, and that's the truth. That question is a relationship killer. What happens if I get, you want to have sex? What happens if I get pregnant? Well, I thought you were using contraception. If you're not, I will. Yeah, but what happens if I get pregnant? Well, listen, I'm a decent guy. I'll pay for half the abortion. Or I'm a really decent guy. I'll pay for the whole abortion. If you know, you're old enough, I can see a lot of it. There were a lot of marriages that were preceded by a pregnancy in the 50s and 60s, and probably in the history of mankind. But most often when the young man was pressing the young woman to have sex, she would say, "What happens if I get pregnant?" And his answer basically had to be, "I'll marry you. That's why I want to have sex with you. I love you. And we'll just move our wedding date up a bit if you get pregnant." And that happened a lot, right? And some of those marriages did pretty darn well. They got off to a rocky start. It's not the best way to start a marriage. But they truly did think that they were having sex because they loved each other, right? And so the pregnancy was ill-timed, not a good way to start a marriage, but it still was in that kind of understanding that sex leads to babies and babies mean marriage, right? Abortions by age group, again, the most of them are under 30. 50% of pregnancies under 30 end in abortion, and then some even younger and some older. Reasons for abortion: rape, almost never. Incest, almost never. Physical life of the mother, almost never. Physical health of the mother, almost never. Fetal health, almost never. Mental health of the mother, who knows what that means. Lifestyle reasons: personal choice. Too young to be a parent. Don't have enough money. I don't want to change my life. I'm already poor. My mother's already a single mother and in a poor relationship. Had enough children or sex selection, 98% or more. These are the reasons for abortion. A reason for killing a new little human being. A reason for killing one's own baby, right? Whoa, what have we done? How are we educating people? What are we doing in our culture that these reasons seem sufficient to our culture to kill a new little human being? And this is what choice really looks like. I think I used that picture when I was back here in Toronto many decades ago. All right, the effect of contraception on marriage is extremely interesting. This chart, it's just fascinating. It's the increase in the divorce rate between 1950 and almost 2000. And you'll notice that the divorce rate went down around 1960, and that's when the pill came on the market. It was around 10% in 1950, and that's what it had been for a long time. And in a certain sense, there had already been a kind of contraceptive culture, largely among Protestants and married people, right? Protestants accepted contraception in 1930. All Christian churches were opposed to contraception until 1930. Then the Lambeth Conference, the Anglicans accepted it. You could tell on our street in Pennsylvania, lived on a small town in Pennsylvania. Almost everybody was living the same lifestyle, married with children. Everybody went to church, some church. The Catholics generally had 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 children. The Protestants had 2, 3, 4 children. You could tell by how many children people had, whether they were Catholic or Protestants. That's not absolutely reliable, of course, but just as a kind of a litmus test. By 1960, the pill came on the market. And by 1980 or so, actually before that, but the divorce rate doubled. But let's say it's a 20-year time. The divorce rate doubled between 1960 and 1980, more than doubled. That has never happened in the history of mankind, that the divorce rate doubled in a 20-year period. That's unprecedented. So what was different between this 20-year period of time and every other 20-year period in time? It was contraception. Every female who wanted a contraception had one, basically by 1970, and then women were on contraception. And the divorce rate just kept climbing as women were using contraceptives. Couples were using contraception. Couples weren't getting married before they had sex. So, I mean, this is, as my educated college sophomores will tell me, that's just correlation, it's not causation. Meaning, it's just two things that happen to go together. Like people who go to Disneyland, I don't know, have a better Christmas than others. And they say it just happens, it's correlation, it's not really a causation. I'm not sure. And you want to say, what else accounts for it? What else accounts for a doubling of the divorce rate in 20 years, if we can explain kind of how contraception changes everything, sexual relationships, male-female relationships that might do this. Now this is, so you notice that divorce rate it went up in 1980, it started going down a bit, and then it started going up a little bit. And now it's been going down. That little bit that you see is that little top thing, and then it's been going down. The divorce rate has been going down for the last 20 years. And you wonder, what is that all about? Anybody know? Cohabitation. People aren't getting married. I think most people have been divorced before they got married. You know, how many cohabitations have they had that they thought they would last? And they're together for 2 or 3 years, and then they break up. Another one for 2 or 3 years, and then they break up. That seems like it's a divorce to me, right? So people aren't getting married. Every priest will tell you way down for the number of wedding ceremonies that they're happening. Okay, again, adults ages 25 to 34 are most likely to be cohabiting. It's an incredible phenomenon. The proportion of children aged 0 to 14 living in a lone parent family, a step family, or without their parents by age group in Canada, 2016. And you'll notice at the very end, the total number of children aged 0 to 14 that are in one of those groups not living with both of their biological parents, it's one out of three. 1 out of 3. If there's one thing I can count on my young people when I talk to college students, etc., one thing I can count on them feeling is that they absolutely hate divorce. They hate it, right? Because either they've grown up in a divorced household or their friends are divorced. And none of them feel secure. It doesn't matter how committed the parents are to each other, how much the parents don't believe in divorce. They know that happened to their friend Billy, whose parents gave them that impression. And then Billy goes home one day and Dad's gone, right? And so every child thinks tomorrow my parents might divorce. You can tell it to them 1,000 times, we'll never divorce, we love each other. You should. Parents should make sure their kids hear this 1,000 times because they think it could happen any day now. Any day now it could happen. And it's absolutely devastating to children. We're finding out more and more of the effect on children of divorce throughout their lives. As you all know, you've thought this, but when Dad leaves, he doesn't leave just mom, he leaves the children. Or when Mom leaves, she doesn't leave just Dad, she leaves the children. And their thought is, if Mom really loved me, she wouldn't leave. If Dad really loved me, he wouldn't leave. My dad loves me and he wants to see me every day. And now I see him only every other weekend and a couple vacations. If he really loved me, how could he not want to be here, right? And then they think, well, gee, maybe I caused it. Maybe, Mom and Dad are fighting, but maybe I did it too. Maybe there's something I did, and they feel guilty about this. And they're living basically in a war zone. Both of my sisters have been divorced. One remarried very happily, thank you, God. But the tensions were incredible, always fighting about who's picking up whom and what time and who left off someone late and who changed appointments and who did this, and it's just a mess. And the kids are, missing events with their friends because they have to go see Dad, and then I miss them. I go home for Christmas and they're not there because they spend Christmas with Dad. And when do I get to see the kids? What's happening? You want part?
You know the picture you had up of your family way back?
Oh, way back.
Yeah.
Right.
Was
that they did not divorce. Yeah. They had a beautiful marriage, and the brother there died just 2 years ago. All right, 64. But the influence. I can see his kids they're a bit cut adrift, of course, but their mother's a rock. She's an absolute rock. But the influence that he'll forever have in his life, death in a certain sense is easier to deal with than divorce, because he didn't leave of his own volition. He tried as hard as he could to stay, and those kids, he endured 3.5 years of terrible cancer treatment because he was just convinced he'd fight it. And at a certain point, about 6 months before he died, I talked to him every day for a period of time, and I said, Gary, I said, I think we should stop praying for a cure, because God knows we want one. We don't have to knock on that door anymore. He knows. I said, but we need to prepare for death. And he didn't want to admit he was dying. He's a fighter. He was going to beat it. He said, I think that'd be a good idea. So we spent the next 6 months preparing for death, which was very beautiful. But the kids, I mean, that dad just fought. And so different from the dads who just leave, okay? A similar sort of thing, parents in homes of high school seniors, U.S. in 2016, 50% of kids are living with their married birth parents. Everybody else is living in some other arrangement, all right? It's incredible. The effect on children, again, they no longer have their rock. Their rock was their mother and the father together, and that's gone. There's a marvelous book that's just been edited by Lila Miller called Primal Loss. The now adult children of divorce speak. These are heart-wrenching stories of people who are now adults and how that divorce affected them their whole lives. And it's honestly, I've known people who read this book, learned about this book, knew their neighbors were divorcing, ran out of their house, caught the husband in the driveway and said, read this, all right? And they didn't get the divorce. They may get it eventually, but at this point he said, whoa, I had no idea. Everybody says the kids will survive, the kids are doing okay, kids will do fine. And once you have a child, I mean, that's your commitment is to that child. You brought that child into the world, and you offered that child a father, and you offered that child a mother. You don't take that away. They need that, all right? So you have to be willing to pay a huge price to do what's right for that child. You have to be willing to pay a huge price. The NFP divorce rate, those using a natural family planning, actually nobody knows. We don't have good studies, all right? We have one study that was done by Mercedes Wilson, who runs a group called the Family of the Americas, awesome woman. Her study shows that 3% of couples get divorced who use natural family planning. I suspect that's close to right? But some people say that her study had a low response rate. It was kind of self-selected, and the people that had divorce might not have responded. So her figure might be unduly low. And I would say, okay, well, let's say it's 100% wrong. That means 6% got divorced. Let's say it's 200% wrong. All right, I don't know what that means. I don't know how the percentages work, but it's 12% or something like that. And you just keep going. It's going to be a long time to get up to 50%. So at least we know one thing, is a whole heck of a lot less than people who are using contraception. People really like another study by Richard Faring, who's, again, a remarkable man. He had actually a doctorate in nursing and teaches at Marquette University in the United States, and has an online NFP course that's sort of top of the line. But this is what he found. He's very cautious. He's an academic. Ever users, anybody who has ever used NFP, had a 9.6% divorce rate, compared to a 14.4% divorce rate for those who had never used NFP. I sat and looked at this for a long time. I'm trying, what the heck does that mean? 9.6 divorce rate on those who have ever used NFP for a week, for a month, for 2 months. You know, you have to talk about using NFP for a long stretch of time to have it have an effect on the marriage. It's couples who are committed to using NFP in their marriage that should be the test case, not those who have ever used it. So that's my complaint about this one. Ever users is a weak category. The comparison should be between those who have used it throughout their marriage. But still, it's significantly lower than those who have never used NFP. It leads to poverty. 71% of poor families with children are not married. Surest predictor of poverty is being a single mother with children. 1 in 2 African American children lives in a single parent home. Okay, and this has led to same-sex marriages. If contraception, if sex doesn't have to have anything to do with procreation, which is what contraception says, it actually says that having babies is kind of a threat, and it's a negative, and that it'd be better if you could have sex without having the possibility of a baby, and that sex is just for expressing love. We've moved away from that. Sex is just for having a pleasurable physical experience, right? But we've now moved to, again, 20 years ago, I could use in class an example to say that if we approved this, it would mean that we'd be approving same-sex marriages. And everybody would go like, what? What? That'll never happen. That'll never happen. Now it's something that every young person thinks is everybody's human right, is to marry whoever they want to marry. And I said, you can marry whoever you want to marry, whoever you love. And then I always ask them, can a father marry his son or his daughter? Can a mother marry her daughter or her son? Why not? What about teachers and their pupils? Can they have sex with them? There's always headlines. Teacher had sex with students. Doctor, is it okay for doctors to have sex with their patients? You can go down the line. We all think that there's relationships where there can be a love. There certainly is love between mother and daughter and mother and son, father. But sex in that relationship, everybody goes, and what did they say? They actually use the word, that's unnatural. That's what they say. It's unnatural. Why is it unnatural? You say, why are you even talking about this? Everybody's, ugh. But, that'll be a still somewhere. That face that I just made will be a still. It's unnatural. And people have a visceral response to it. Well, that's the response we used to have, right? And this is how confused we've become, that we don't have that response anymore. And in fact, any of us who have any objections to this, all are homophobes, and I'm probably going to get arrested before I get to the airport. But there we go. And then we have transgenderism, which is, I never, ever thought that we would get to the point where we would say that small children can decide their sex, that kids 5, 3, 2 can decide what gender they want to be, and that they will receive hormones or have sex reassignment surgery. They make life-changing decisions at a very early age. Children are taken away from parents who won't consent to this now. And this is one, again, this is a transgendered female individual who was born biologically a male and had surgery and hormones that turned him into a female. He won a biking event. Males are winning all the female athletic events. There's no athletic event in which a female can beat even a mediocre male. Serena Williams, the best female tennis player ever. In fact, the person who has won more Grand Slams than any tennis players, even my beloved Roger Federer. She's won 23 and he's won 21, all right? She says she couldn't beat a male tennis player probably in the top 400. Top 400, all right? Serena Williams. Do we want to be denied seeing Serena Williams and all these other female tennis players who are so wonderful to watch? Because males, if they decide that transgendered males, we did with one before, Renee Richards, I think, they'll go right to the top. I don't understand how parents of girls can tolerate this. I can't understand why there aren't lawsuits from here to forever. Population decline. As I said, I tried to spent some time looking for the right chart. But this goes to show you, again, from 1950 to 2000. Oh, this is not, okay, wait a second. See, I'm a little tired, but I'll get this. This is the fertility rate, birth per woman. And that's been declining since 1950. And that's a much more important figure than raw numbers of population, right? How many children a woman has. As you know, you need 2.2 children to reproduce a population per family, on the average 2.2. You'll notice by 2009 or 2095, everybody's at about two children per family, and then it continues to go down, all right? It's an enormous problem in our world. Again, it goes below replacement rate It says right there around, right about there, 2020. And you're going to be hearing more and more stories. If you go to Italy, is one of the countries that actually is having a decline in numbers of population, not just fertility rate. And if you go to Italy, maybe my favorite country, all over the place, there are empty villages.
That's because I came away from there.
Pardon me?
It's because I came away from there.
Because you left. Shame on you. No, but people, you can buy a house they'll give you a house in Italy if you agree to bring it up to speed and live there for so many years. We could buy a village. I'm trying to find a number of people who want to buy a village with me in Italy, and they'll do it. They'll sell you a whole village in Italy. So that's where we are. Now, a little bit of time left. I suppose one of the biggest reasons for the mess we're in is that Catholics have never been taught the reasons for the Church's teaching. Never been taught the reasons. It's never been mentioned from the pulpit. It's not taught in any confirmation class. In most marriage prep classes for many, many years, and I suspect it's still true, Catholics are told to just find an effective form of contraception, something that works for them. More and more places are teaching, requiring an introductory course in natural family planning or even a full course of natural family planning. But you're asking people to do a 180-degree turn in a short period of time when they have lived in a culture and grown up in a culture. Something like 85% of people who get married have cohabited, right? The number of people who haven't had sex before marriage is infinitesimal, right? The number who have not lived together is small. And so how do you take these people who've grown up in our culture and help them understand the Church's teaching? Again, for them, sex is just sex. And that's a huge problem. At least when my parents got married, even those who had sex, their age group who had sex before marriage, they knew it belonged in marriage. And they knew that in marriage, sex is pretty much something entirely different from sex outside of marriage. It's a commitment. It speaks of commitment. Sex is an amazing commitment to a person. We might have a child together. That means we're ready. We should be ready. We should be ready to have a life together. Make a commitment to each other because we're making a commitment to this child that we're bringing into existence. But we've lost that sense. There's just sex. And I wonder how people do this. You know, people have sex. They live together. The night they're living together in the same house, the night before they get married, roll out of bed, go off to the wedding, go off to the honeymoon. What is the honeymoon? Right? What is the honeymoon? What is it they're doing differently now than what they did before? I watched an Oprah Winfrey show once, so she had 5 newlywed couples, and they talked about the year before their wedding, and it was all about preparing for the wedding. You know, everything, spent thousands and thousands of dollars and thought down to the minutest detail how this was going to be the most extravagant and wonderful event of their whole lives, right? And they said, driving away from the wedding, they basically said, what do we do now? What do we do now? Now, those of you who are virgins before you got married, you know what you do now, right? And you know what you are looking forward to for the rest of your life. And you're starting to build a life together like you haven't had before. And the exhilaration of that, I'm yours, you're mine, we've made a formal commitment, now we can have sexual intercourse and let the babies come, because we're ready, right? And they're leaving the wedding and saying, what do we do now? We spent the last year preparing for our wedding. What do we do now? Well, you just go to your job, I go to my job, and we come home and have dinner together, which is what we've been doing for year 2, whatever, but we had a wedding to plan. What do we do now? Okay, so there you have it. All right, I'm going to give you a quick run through 3 documents. One is Karol Wojtyła's Love and Responsibility. Karol Wojtyła was John Paul II. He wrote this book in 1960. John Paul II loved the Church's teaching on sexuality. He loved human love. That's what he said. He fell in love with human love. He did a lot of counseling of college students. He was a chaplain at a university, and he walked them through their relationships. And one thing he always made was the distinction between using another person and respecting another person. Even today, that's a very important distinction. Young people don't want to be used, right? And when then someone's betrayed me, right? That's usually in high school. Again, by the time I get to college, it's just you walk away. But this is one of his insights. If the possibility of parenthood is deliberately excluded from marital relationships, the character of the relationship automatically changes. It changes away from unification in love and in the direction of mutual, or rather bilateral, enjoyment. Meaning here, if you're using contraception, even within marriage, you're moving away from this act being an expression of complete self-giving to this other person. You're holding back something. You're holding back your fertility. Giving your fertility to another person is always a pledge, should be a pledge of a lifetime commitment to that person. Holding back the procreative possibility reduces the meaning of the act. I want the pleasure of sex, you want the pleasure of sex, let's use each other to have pleasure. Whereas respecting the procreative possibility means that this act is bigger than the both of us. It's way bigger than the both of us. This is an act that points towards the future. Contraception points to the present. Right? Humane Vitae uses a phrase called conscious parenthood. It's translated in the inferior translations as responsible parenthood, but my translation uses the word that is in the Latin, which is conscious parenthood. You say, what the heck is conscious parenthood? Nobody knows what that is. Well, this is what it means. Marital love requires that spouses be fully aware of their mission, the word is munus for Latinus, of conscious parenthood, paternitatem consciam. Well, what did I just do? Sorry. Today's society justly calls for conscious parenthood. Thus, it's important that it be rightly understood. Right? Now, that is a phrase that is taken right out of Love and Responsibility, conscious parenthood. And this is the meaning in Love and Responsibility. Number one, it means being aware that having sex leads to having babies. I want to put that in Sharpie over every teenager's and young person's head. Sex leads to babies, all right? Babies need parents. The parents should be married. So it should be, sex shouldn't be had until marriage. Excuse me. You need to accept and prepare for that consequence. If you're having sex, you should be prepared for the possibility of a child. You're conscious that this act leads to babies. It's actually, and the Polish word, and of course Wojtyła wrote in Polish, it means accepting that consequence as good. It's like finding out that something, it's a good, like dark chocolate has antioxidants. It's like, whoa, you're supposed to eat a piece of dark chocolate every day because it's good for you. Yippee. Well, that's how people should actually think about sex and babies. Can you imagine? God wants to populate his earth, all right? He wants all these souls with him in heaven. So he gave us this incredibly pleasurable act that we want to engage in so that we would welcome babies. And we should see that and say, wow, that's an amazing thing that these two things are connected. Sex and babies. It's great, good thing. And it means being ready to be a parent, right? And for him, it means you have to choose a spouse who would be a good parent. That's the non-negotiable as far as, that's the criterion that's the most important for choosing a spouse. And it's a beautiful thing to say, I want you to be the father or the mother of my children. I would say that's a marriage proposal. And I've actually met people after I've given these talks that said, that's how my fiance proposed to me. He didn't say, I want to marry you, but he did eventually say, I want you to be the mother of my children. Therefore, will you marry me? Now, what does that mean? I want you to be the mother of my children. Or I want you to be the father of my children. I want someone who looks like you, talks like you, laughs like you, but most importantly, has your values. Right? I trust my children to you. At this point, they're our children. Right. You have to choose a spouse who will be a good parent. And you don't inflict parenthood on someone who is not ready. As I said, this young man I'm talking to, you love your girlfriend, but you're not ready for parenthood. Why would you inflict that possibility upon her? The ultimate affirming statement that you can make to a person of the opposite sex is, I'm willing to be a parent with you. All right? You're willing to have sex, we all are, with a lot of people. Don't make that list. All right? But, you know, if you allowed yourself to say, who do I like to have sex with, it might be a pretty long list. Right? But the number of people you want to be a parent with is a short list. Right? Because you want a different quality in that person. And so that has to be the foremost. Certainly you want to love them, you want to have a sexual attraction to them, you want to have fun with them. But unless you want to be a parent with them, it's not the right relationship. I had a young woman who I was a good friend of mine, college student, went off to graduate school, met this man, the likes of which she had never met, as often that's the case. And there he is, the most fascinating, handsome man she'd ever met. She was a good Catholic, but she started having sex with him, and after a period of time realized it was wrong. She wasn't compatible with her Catholic faith. And she said, but they had a relationship which is incredibly volatile. The problem was he was not Catholic. In fact, he hated Catholicism, didn't believe in God and hated Catholicism. Lapsed Catholic. Kept on this relationship for some years. And finally I said to her, I said, either you have to break up with him or marry him. This is stupid to just keep going on like this. You're not finding the right man. Why won't you break up with him? And she said, well, I've never met a man, I don't think I'll ever meet a man who fascinates me and attracts me as much as he does. And then she says, but I don't want him to be the father of my children because we don't share values. And I said, would you write that down maybe 5, 25, 100 times and take a look at it and see what conclusions you might want to draw from that statement. And before long, she broke up with him, and a couple of years later, she went a more normal man, she's married and had children, had a beautiful life together. All right, but this idea, if you say, I love this person, I want to spend my life with this person, but I don't want this person to be the father or mother of my children, time to move on. Time to move on. Humane vitae. All right. I think I'll stop here and maybe take this up before I start my talk next time and kind of complete this talk. Did you intend for there to be any questions, Jackie? All right. I'm more than a little hard of hearing. I think it's God's punishment because I've never listened to anybody. But if you don't use it, you'll lose it. You know. So you have to stand up and shout, and I might have to walk towards you. We have maybe for 2 or 3 questions. We have a chance. Yes, ma'am. Up and shout.
What you're saying about this parenthood and that's when they make a commitment to each other. That's when most cohabiting couples decide to get married, is when they're now talking about having kids together. So in a sense, that foundational thing is still there, even though they're cohabiting.
Yeah. Do you have studies to that effect, or are you just assuming that's the case?
Well, I've noticed that with my
Okay, good. Again, I think that's for many people who've been raised well and still have a residue of the proper understanding that's the case. But the fact is that many couples who are cohabiting get married when the relationship is wobbly, all right? And it's not working that well. And basically they say maybe it's because we haven't made a commitment to each other, and maybe it will get better if we get married. There's also those who everybody's bugging them. You're living together, when are you going to get married? And they sort of say, the sex is good, we don't fight that much. Who wants to start all over? We might as well get married. So, finding a person is not easy. And you found someone at least you get along with. The sex is okay. Well, who wants to start all over? And the problem is it's after marriage that they start asking the real questions, which they haven't talked about while they're cohabiting, because that's a tentative relationship. When it gets to be a permanent relationship, you start asking, when are we going to have kids? How many kids? Are we going to go to church? What part of the country are we permanently going to settle in? Whose house do we go to at Christmas time? And all of a sudden, people have very different ideas about these things. One wants 1 child at a time, maybe at the most 2. The other said, I want 3 or 4. Didn't have brothers and sisters, and I would like my children to have them. And all of a sudden, questions I tell people you should have settled in the first 3 weeks or 4 weeks of dating. They don't date. then these would be non-negotiables. I want 3 to 4 children, at least. I want to go to church on Sunday. Do you? I said, don't fall in love with anybody until some of these questions are answered. I said, put a hold on your feelings and your emotions until you get a lay of the land. Instead, people just go wacko. Romance is just kind of insanity. It's certifiably insane. And you found someone and the chemistry is great and they make you laugh and they make you feel good about yourself and they must be perfect. This happened to someone I know I love very much, and it happened. I mean, she was still married to the man that had another man for whom she had this experience. And they had separated, and then she met this man and he made her feel good about herself. And within no time at all, they're living together, right? About 3 or 4 months later, she comes home one day and he's gone. They didn't have any breakup, they didn't have any fight, but he decided he didn't want to be in a relationship. He wasn't ready for that. He himself was newly divorced 6 months. And she's saying, what a creep he is. I said, why? He didn't make any promises. He is, but you're not much better. I mean, what did you expect from him? You barely knew him. You don't know his values. You haven't made a commitment. You have no idea. All the reason you loved him or thought you did is because he made you feel good. That's not a basis. So it's a mixed bag. The reasons for those who are cohabiting, they get married. A lot of people either get married or break up when they start having that conversation because they realize they do or don't want to have kids. If you want to have kids, let's get married. If you don't want to have kids, goodbye. Yes, sir.
Can you point me to something online or a book? I'm looking for a body of empirical evidence that contraception within a marriage is harmful to the marriage or the children. But I get your contraception harms me, I get that.
Yeah.
But inside marriage, young couples, spacing their children, limiting their children, and I want to say, this is harmful. And they say, no, it isn't. Not doing it would be harmful. And I run out of arguments because I don't know what the answer is.
Yes. There's, again, people don't want to do those studies because they don't even think it's a possibility. They think contraception is a solution to all problems. So it's very hard to get even funding for studying NFP marriages and divorce. People say, that's crazy. Why would there be any connection? There's not very many people who use NFP. Why get funding for that? It was very hard to get funding for that study that Mercedes Wilson did. So the effect of contraception on marriage is, I want to say in one sense we know, because, I'm sure there's many, many elements that enter into why the divorce rate is over 50%. But again, for natural family planning couples, it's a small fraction of that, even at the highest. So that's a kind of evidence that you start with and say, why is it that couples using natural family planning seem almost never to divorce? And all other couples who are using contraception, 98%, not at any given time, they've done it. I think it's at any given time about 60% of married couples are using contraception. The others are already past the age, or they want children. There's all sorts of reasons people aren't contracepting, but almost all of them have contracepted for a great period of their marriage. Now, NFP, again, is not a singular thing. It's not just that you're charting your cycle. We'll talk more about it, but most people are religious. Most people go to church every Sunday. In fact, I'll talk about it later, but the highest predictor of a long-lasting marriage is having a religion and sharing a religion. That's the highest predictor of a long-lasting marriage, and it doesn't matter, honestly, what religion it is. And partly that's because something's bigger than yourself, all right? And you're not living in accord with your own lights. You're living in accord with some other vision of the universe than what you want. So natural family planning, most people who use natural family planning are religious. So that's as much a factor as the NFP. But there's a lot of people who are religious who divorce, right? And it seems the NFP religious people don't divorce, right? So that adds another extra element to it. And most people say it is because they learn that sex is not just all about pleasure. It's all about forming a family. And that, again, in marriage is a simplistic statement, but with more than a grain of truth, that when women enter a relationship that use natural family planning, they think they've got themselves a very special man, right? A man that will control his sexual desires because he doesn't want her taking all these chemicals. He doesn't want her doing this to her body. And he will abstain for 7-10 days a month. Why? Because he loves her, and possibly because he loves God, that this is not in God's will. So this woman is saying, I've got myself a very unusual and special man. I don't know a man on the face of the earth that doesn't want a wife who thinks he's an unusual and special man. All right, this does great things for the male in the relationship. My wife thinks, she's not like most women who thinks their man is more than a little bit of a jerk, but he's my jerk. And I love him, but yeah, in this case, no, I look up to this man. He's extraordinary. He's not like other men. He doesn't think I need to be sexually available to him all the time. He enjoys my company even when I'm not sexually available. That does wonders for a marriage, right? I think if a priest told me that when he's talking to married women about natural family planning, and many of them use contraception, he says, how many of you feel like you're being used sexually in your marriage? And all of them do, because they're contracepting. He said, all of them do. When you ask women to use natural family planning, some of them do because their husbands, they don't want to, they don't use natural family planning. They just have the babies as they come, and they won't restrain themselves. And their husbands are very selfish. They're just saying, well, let's just let the babies come. And she says, yeah, well, who's having all those babies, those 7 to 8 babies that now you expect me to homeschool and this and that and that and that? Because I don't believe in NFP. Yeah, what you don't believe in is abstinence, is what you don't believe in. So it's a problem in some couples, a rare group, but there is a group in which the male particularly doesn't believe in natural family planning, he says, but the reason largely is because he doesn't want to abstain those 7 to 10 days. So he too is using his wife. He's saying, I want you to be sexually available to me and have as many babies as we can. The church doesn't say that. We'll talk about that.